So let's now turn to personal pronouns. The Stanford list says that he and she should be replaced with they to avoid misgendering non-binary and trans people. The list recommends asking for people's pronouns because misgendering is apparently very harmful. So what is misgendering? Well, it's the failure to use a person's chosen pronouns. It's supposedly invalidating and disrespectful to trans and non-binary people. The new pronouns arise out of the category of gender identity. Unlike biological sex, gender identity is how you feel and express yourself through appearance and behavior. So some non-binary and trans people choose pronouns other than he and she to express that they don't fit into the neat categories of man and woman.
Misgendering a trans person is an act of violence, and it is. It's an act of psychological violence. It's a denial of somebody's personhood and a complete refusal to acknowledge their identity, whether intentional or not.
If someone you meet has pronouns that are they, them, you should respect that and use them, because the impact of misgendering them can take a huge toll on their mental health, and it's extremely disrespectful. So using the correct pronouns is not optional.
My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and that's a non-negotiable.
It's also not a preference. It's who they are. You need to use those pronouns. It's literally an extension of my arm or my leg. It's just as a part of me as a vital organ.
These are not my preferred pronouns. These are my pronouns. You will use them, or you will not refer to me. I don't care how many times you say sorry. Just don't do it again.
So yes, non-binary people take this very seriously, and the reaction to misgendering can be anything from being wounded and sad, to confused, to outright aggression.
I have this one coworker who simply refuses to use the correct pronouns for me. I've called her out every time she misgenders me, and she just is resigned to not change. And today just broke something in me. I just snapped. I ended up yelling at her after the third time she misgendered me, and within like 30 minutes, like, I use they, them pronouns. And she got so defensive. And I just started explaining to her, like, I'm sick and tired of this shit. Like, you need to at least make an attempt. And she popped off, got upset, got defensive. What are you gonna do about it? And I just said, I'm gonna be really hurt and sad. Like, that's all I can do about it.
So I was just picking up my vehicle from an oil change, and the person came out of the garage and said, "What can I do for you, young lady?" And I know that this was intended to be a greeting of respect and kindness, or politeness maybe, but I had this immediate, like, okay, young, maybe comparatively, I'll take it. But I was like, lady, what do I do with that? Like, it's so complicated because I know this person only intended kindness. There was a smile on their face. Like, I know that they weren't trying to like patronize me or gender me, but I felt so gendered and so inappropriately gendered, and I don't know what to do with that. Like, what do you do with that when someone like has the best of intentions, and I don't really want to spend all of my spoons trying to educate someone?
You're gonna give me my money back.
Excuse me, sir, there's a young man in here.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
I can call the police if you'd like me to. You need to settle down.
You need to settle down and mind your business, okay? Ma'am, once again, ma'am.
I said both of you.
No, you said sir. Once again, it's ma'am.
I actually said both of you guys. It was in general.
Right beforehand, you fucking said sir.
Sir? Okay.
Motherfucker, take it outside. If you want to call me sir again, I will show you a fucking sir.
I apologize.
Motherfucker.
I apologize now.
But complicating things is the massive array of pronouns and genders. There is truly no limit because gender identity, as we're told, is chosen and defined by each individual's feelings at any given time. Neopronouns are those that are made up individually, so you can identify as literally anything, from a different species, like a rodent, to a mythical creature, like a vampire or a zombie. Gender and pronouns can fluctuate depending on how the individual feels from one moment to the next.
For many non-binary people, using he or she can make them uncomfortable, but lots of people use multiple pronouns. This preference can change day to day as their gender fluctuates.
But for a lot of non-binary people, it means that you just don't exclusively identify as a man or woman. And under that, there's a whole umbrella of gender identities where people might have pronouns that change day to day. There might be people who have one set of pronouns for the rest of their life. You might have non-binary people, too, who are fluid with their gender identities in itself.
We've been told that using chosen pronouns of a non-binary or trans person is a sign of respect and validation for that person's gender identity. But seeking validation isn't a good strategy for mental health. It can create anxiety, depression, and low esteem. The psychological need for acceptance has a dark downside, especially when you do not get the acceptance you seek. This study from 2023 tells us that being hyper-aware of supposedly offending words can be harmful. It shows that if you are primed to be offended, you're more likely to be offended. So efforts to eliminate harmful words may actually contribute to the high and growing rates of mental illness on college campuses. Research by Dr. Jonathan Haidt shows that from 2010 to 2020, anxiety among U.S. undergraduates increased 134%. Depression increased 106%.
Students head back to class. A new book challenges colleges to better prepare young people for life after they graduate. The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. The book says many teens and young adults are unprepared for the real world. Authors Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt, that's Haidt, not hate,
that's right,
write in the book. Many university students are learning to think in distorted ways, and this increases their likelihood of becoming fragile, anxious, and easily hurt. They join us at the table.
Right about that. Adolescent anxiety and depression are unlike anything seen in modern times. So how have campuses and schools changed as a result of that?
And that's the scariest revelation for us, and doing the research for it, is that, our argument is essentially we have anxious, depressed, and polarized students, and we're wondering how we got there. And our point is that we're teaching the mental habits of anxious, depressed, and polarized people.
Mm-hmm. And so how students learn to frame things will greatly affect whether they thrive or whether they retreat into a shell in a defensive crouch in college.
What they do is reinforce the idea that trauma is central to your identity and that you should let it define you instead of dealing with it, dispatching it, and moving beyond it. People wonder why the younger generations have so much anxiety. It's this stuff.
I can only imagine how frustrating it must be to feel that your gender identity doesn't fit into neat categories and lacking the language to communicate that adequately. And we should be sympathetic toward people who are struggling to figure all this out. All of us struggle with our identity and our confidence during certain times in our lives. But the current approach of trans and non-binary people is to demand that everyone change their speech and adopt unfamiliar, non-grammatical jargon that itself sounds alien and is forever changing. We've heard from non-binary people who insist that others must respect and validate their identity and demand that others speak with the correct pronouns or face accusations of inflicting psychological violence. This is emotional blackmail, and it won't win over many people. Courtesy can be reasonably expected. We should be courteous to each other. Respect is different. It's not extracted from others. It's granted. Now, before I can do that, I need to know a lot more about you. And if we're asking each other for pronouns, we obviously have just met. Or you've changed your pronouns since the last time we met, and we have to start over. And how can I possibly validate your identity? By your definition, only you know what that is, and you can change it anytime you choose. And whether or not people decide to use your pronouns, don't read too much into that. There are reasons why I would do so that have nothing to do with granting respect and validation. Maybe I want to avoid social friction and awkwardness. Maybe I want to learn something from you, and to do that I have to have a conversation with you. If it's in my interest, I may agree to use your pronouns, but that doesn't mean you have my respect or my validation. At the same time, you cannot conclude that not using your pronouns means that I'm a phobe of some sort or that I'm invalidating your personhood. If your identity requires people to signal that they believe something they don't, you can also expect pushback, and justifiably so. Either way, you're giving others power over your mental state. By setting up these rules of engagement, you've made yourself vulnerable to unhealthy negative emotions based entirely on what others do or do not do. So while you may think that others need to care more about your chosen pronouns, maybe you need to care less about them and stop endowing them with so much power over your state of mind. This is not entirely the fault of trans and non-binary people. This is what they've been taught by teachers, activists, and the media. They have been primed to expect offense, which means they're much more likely to find it. There is no right to not be offended. The risk of having your feelings hurt is endemic to free speech, and the only insulation is self-confidence. We all have to build that ourselves without the expectations that others will play along with our wishes.